Hello, folks. Another episode of Burning Platform with my good friend and colleague, Bob Evans. Bob, this is like your 15th time you've appeared in my series. Thank you very much. Merry Christmas. And I'm looking forward to this session where we're going to go through your Cloud Wars top 10, I think that's what you call it, list, and go through each vendor. And then we can argue, and I'll call you Jane, you ignorant. You know what I mean? When I don't agree with
Much.
you.
Yeah. Hey, Vinny, thank you so much. And I tell you, I think you're a man of great intelligence and class and distinction. But the fact that keep inviting me back, that's not going to be good for your character, your reputation, Vinny. So you might
I
want to
guess I
consider
guess we need to end this right now.
that.
Bob, so why don't you do this since you haven't memorized and I have to go look at it every once in a while. Lead us through the top 10 now that you have. Let's talk about them and then
Sure.
I'm sure you have a couple that are going to change or you
Yep.
always it's not a static list. That's a great
Yeah.
thing about it. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
constantly moving. So let's start that way and then you can add a few more that you're looking at.
Sure, sure, Vinny. Thanks again for having me on. Burning Platform's a terrific thought leadership program. I'm honored to be here. Vinny, I started the Cloud Wars Top 10  eight, 9 years ago. And what I wanted to do was try to reflect the way that tech companies were jumping on this new cloud thing in terms of how well they aligned what they were offering with what customers needed. And in the early days, Vinny, I think it was often a case where the tech vendors were selling and marketing what they happened to have. And the customer would say, okay, why should I be interested in that? And the vendors would say, well, it's because it's what I have. And so the first 2 or 3 years were very vendor centric, and quickly, like in all maturing markets, uh, the the balance of power tipped from the sellers to the buyers, and the customers began to force the tech vendors to do things more in line with where customers were headed. So I think it was fabulous evolution there. So I rank these companies. Of course, size matters, growth, innovation, uh, things like that. But it's also, are they aligned with where the market is headed rather than where it's been? So Microsoft has been the top company for several years, and in large part because of their size, their ability to cover, as Satya Nadella says, every aspect of our customers' digital estate. I know there's some folks that have denigrated Microsoft's cloud efforts and said, oh, yeah, yeah, all it is, Word for the cloud or Microsoft 365. I think that's shortchanging them quite a bit. You're right. It's what the customers were looking for. Um, Google Cloud, which started Vinny as number
Oh,
nine or
let,
maybe
let,
number,
let- let's talk about Microsoft,
yeah,
unless you want to come
sure.
back. So I would say Microsoft, Azure to me has been, you know, phenomenal ride, right? And obviously Office 365 is one of the applications on it. But even on its own, Azure has been uh, just a rocket ship. I'm a little more concerned about them going forward. I think, dependence on OpenAI for their AI, right,
Yeah.
has probably not given them enough like with Google now with Gemini. The momentum appears to be with Google, and we'll talk about Google in a minute. But so that's one concern. Not concern, but I mean, you can see it's a um, they're not consistently leading the market, right? And the other thing I worry about is as we move into the enterprise agentic market, the enterprise apps have been so disappointing over the last few years. It's the same old stuff they acquired. I mean, they've been very dependent on the infrastructure and the Office franchise. So, two things that I'd like to see Satya focus or the new management team focus on more is get serious about enterprise apps and the related agents, right? So,
Yeah, Vinny, it was a great point. I I have found Microsoft over the last 18 to 24 months to be very inconsistent in how they position and talk about Dynamics 365. 2.5, 3, 4 years ago, you'd see on their earnings call, they'd say, oh, Dynamics 365 grew 40% in a quarter. And they talk a lot about it. Now it's sort of a throw in. And I don't know if they're worried that, if they go too heavy into enterprise apps, that SAP is going to say to them, hey, what's going on here? Or Workday, somebody like that. I'm less interested in your infrastructure when you're going to come at me as an ERP competitor. So I agree, Vinny. They've been inconsistent on that. I think the horrendous security shortcomings that were exposed 2 years ago. And remember, Sajid Nadal always says security is our number one job. I haven't heard them address here's how we've rebuilt it top to bottom, which he and security chief Charlie Bell promised 18, 24 months ago. You referred to the new sort of split CEO responsibilities. Is Judson Althoff the commercial guy? Is he going to fix the security thing? Is Satya going to do it as part of his thing now? So yeah,
And
they
even in applications, Workday and SAP are back office focused. There are so many agentic opportunities. The BLS tracks 900 occupations. Go after the healthcare, go after nurses, go after firemen, go after air traffic controllers, go after pilots. I mean, there are so many occupations that SAP and Workday don't come near. Microsoft has the capabilities to get there, right? So
yeah.
I'd like to see them a little more into applications, but then, they're doing pretty well. So who am I to convince them?
Yeah, I find that too, that, I have this strategic, evaluation analysis in my head, and then you look at their numbers, and their numbers have been remarkable. But, Vinny, I was thinking about this discussion earlier, and we'll talk about Oracle in a minute, but there's some people that seem to want to look at this whole business, which the world has never seen anything like what's going on in the tech business. And I think this Cloud Wars Top 10, by focusing on the biggest and most influential, there's never been a force like this, yet there's still a lot of people who get trapped into trying to analyze, assess, evaluate what's going on today and what's coming based on sort of a model of the past, right? Well, no, that Oracle can't borrow money to finance this because nobody ever did it before. And I just think that's either short-sighted or lazy, because we're seeing things emerge now that the global economy has never seen companies this big grow this fast with this much influence. Yet there's a tendency to try to evaluate them by the metrics of the past. So that's going to play into
Yeah,
it for all of these companies.
and to your point about the global economy changing so much, one of the biggest changes is happening right here in the United States. If you believe Trump, I do about 3 times a day, but don't quite often. But he says we've got $20 trillion in investments coming, at least pledges to invest here. What's that going to come into? Next generation plants, next generation warehouses, next generation farms, next generation data centers, highly automated, right?
Yeah.
So that is going to require a new set of applications, new set of jobs that someone like Microsoft is very well positioned, or anybody is well positioned to take advantage of, because it's got to mix digital AI with physical AI, right? You got to have robotics and sensors, drones and conveyor belts and so on if you're going to have robotic, heavily automated plants and so on. Well, let's move on to Google.
Yeah. Yeah. And Vinny, if I could just say one broad point tied into what you're thinking, right? I think it's just wild that, X number of years ago, not that many years ago, we're talking about software companies, right? They made this stuff that required no materials, no, heavy industrial things. Now they're all building some of the most complex factories in the world, right? These data centers. So that is another indicator of the past tells us a lot, but it doesn't tell us accurately where the future of this business is headed, because we're stepping into unknown territory. You go back 2 or 3 years ago, pick any of the big trends or headlines and map them to what's going on today. there's no correlation. Then in the same way, was it 15 months ago, 18 months ago, there was a lot of people tearing their hair out saying this that over data center capacity has been wildly overbuilt. There isn't enough demand. There's too much supply. We saw this, and that's just nuts. So Google Cloud's a perfect example. Now, the next one that we want to discuss, right? Yeah, they had the great infrastructure. They've got things with data and analytics. All of a sudden, boom, they come out with Gemini, the model. Then a little while later, Gemini Enterprise, which is the platform and the ecosystem that ties into it. I have just been enormously impressed with the strategic thinking of Google Cloud, how they've got it top to bottom. What everything wants is tremendous ecosystem, and then they're filling in applications in the white spaces in between what some of their applications partners are doing rather than saying, I'm going to go in and bang heads with them directly. So Thomas Curran has done just an absolutely phenomenal job. And I think Google Cloud's number two on the list. They started at number nine. Uh, I think there's a good chance they could move on the Cloud Wars top 10 and not downward.
Well, so here's my point. It's not just the Gemini, which is obviously in the last couple of months got a lot of people excited, right? To me, the fact that they have TPUs, tensor processing units, as not quite NVIDIA killer, but as an option to customers is to me huge, probably even more than the Gemini momentum. Okay. The one hesitation I always have with Google, even before Thomas arrived, was it's still comfortable in the consumer-centric part of the enterprise, right?
Mhm.
And I still don't see them in verticals or enterprise apps consistently. So when you move into the agentic world, I'd like to see them much more focused on the application side, not necessarily, transaction processing, but agentic focus for different industries and so on. Haven't seen that yet. You may have. I haven't.
Yeah, I think they're Vinny approaching it in a quiet and I think intentionally low key-ish type way, trying to get it right, partly for their own purpose. I mean, largely for their own purpose, but also because I think customers are saying, wait a minute, I got to shift from traditional applications to vertical industry apps. And then they say, no, wait, I got to shift to vertical industry agentic AI. And how does that tie in? So I think Google's trying not to get too far out ahead on some of those things. But the they also, Vinny, and you've talked about this very eloquently and persuasively for a long time, the astonishing cost of integration that enterprise customers bear. And Google Cloud, I think, has to be among the very top companies, maybe number one in offering combinations of solutions to customers that allow the customers to spend less on integration and more on innovation. So that's one of the other reasons I'm quite bullish on them.
Well, who's next on your list?
Oracle, you know, and again, Vinny, I don't want to sound like a broken record here, but how many times did we see or hear over the last handful of years? Oracle's late to the cloud. Oracle doesn't get the cloud, their last generation tech, blah, 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 blah. Now they have an explosively growing cloud infrastructure business. And they got that by saying, I'm going to go compete head to head against three of the most powerful, wealthy, capable, best known corporations in the world: Microsoft, Amazon, Google. And Oracle's carved out a nice chunk of business, and they defied all the traditional wisdom people who said this will never work. So, how did Oracle do that? They did it by very intentionally not trying not to do exactly what the three original hyperscalers did, but coming with a different approach from their technology to things like the multi-cloud approach, which lets customers access and buy Oracle database, and this still makes me laugh every time I hear about it. AWS and Microsoft and Google Cloud all have salespeople selling the Oracle database to their own customers. So it's interesting. So Oracle technology innovation and go-to-market innovation and the just audacity of Larry Ellison is their secret power. It's
Well, I've heard it from you, and I knew we were in the beast of that belly for a few years, but I've heard it from so many different people. Never bet against Larry, and I will usually add, I never bet against Safra, right? Having said that, this RPO focus, right, which is huge for Oracle. I think it's bigger than any of the other hyperscalers, um, has also forced Wall Street to open up the kimono and say, wait a minute, RPO equals CapEx investment equals depreciation. And so, I mean, that's become obvious that, with everything, we've seen that at Oracle. They've had near-death experiences every few years, right? Starting in 1990 with the sales
yeah,
misstatement issues. Then, as you say, early in the 90s, I mean, late in the 90s when, um, sorry, late in the knots, where Larry had invested in NetSuite and Salesforce, but Oracle itself couldn't get going, right?
yeah.
And and now, this potential CapEx exposure, huge CapEx exposure. Um, I mean, he's a Houdini. He'll manage to somehow do it. I don't like that they're very focused on technology customers, right? The other guys are more balanced in there. They have corporate customers. Uh, Oracle is a little too focused on OpenAI and some of the other um, Silicon Valley customers. So, but it'll be fascinating to watch. But when you come up with a new area of focus, um, often it just opens up to Wall Street's not that dumb. And they go, okay, to be able to deliver this, what do we need? So
Right. I agree they're not that dumb, but the insight sometimes, they need a few kicks in the head or another part of their anatomy to get them to see what is coming, right? Because they get so locked in. I always laugh when some of these giant technology companies growing explosively, making huge profits, and the analysts will ask the executives, well, my model shows that, this is not taking place. I remember hearing one of the CEOs say, what do I know? I'm just the CEO of a very big, fast-growing tech company. So I'm probably wrong. But there's also a possibility, you, the Wall Street analyst, there's a possibility that you might need to tinker with your model to align with the new reality rather than me trying to retrofit this cool new stuff I'm doing to fit your backward-looking model. Vinny, the new he's not called chief financial officer, but at Oracle, their principal financial officer, same type of role as Doug Caring. He's been there 25 years, came in with Safra from a brokerage or an investment banking company where they both worked. He's run operations. He helped change their culture. He helped change the whole model from on-premise to sales. He's done the acquisitions that they did. He knows this company inside and out. Now his new role, he's in effect the CFO. He's the guy who would be leading a lot of these discussions around how do we finance this huge infrastructure we have to build out? Can we do it properly? How do we vet these new customers that said, I'm going to buy this much of your stuff over the next 5 years? If this was somebody who came from, the world of pharmaceuticals or retail, you might say, yeah, that guy better learn a whole, or she better learn a whole lot real quickly. Um, Nothing is ever certain in the world, but the fact that Larry Ellison, Safra Catz, Doug Caring, and the two new CEOs are in charge there, I think we should consider the fact they might know more about what they're doing than certain analysts do.
the other thing that I think, since we've been talking about applications and verticals and so on with the first two, that's one thing where Oracle has always been inconsistent. they've spent a lot of money, right? Cerner, and then in the knots, they bought a whole bunch of retechs and every industry they try to cover through acquisitions. But they really haven't done much with that, right? It's still a very horizontal accounting, HR focused application vendor. So again, as you move into agentic world, I'd love to see Mike Cecilia, now that he's got at least a title, do a lot more in specific verticals and build agents for those verticals. So
Yeah, Vinny, I would like to politely disagree with you. I think Oracle has been
you can call
as
me an ignorant, whatever. You don't need to be polite.
you bozo. No, Vinny, I think Oracle's done as much as anybody on continuing to innovate with their traditional LOB applications while also building out a massive portfolio of industry-specific apps. I mean, I believe it's very impressive, as good as anybody's out there right now. And what they're also quietly doing is starting to embed some of the industry-specific capabilities in their LOB apps, and they're going the other way. Some of the LOB stuff now is in their industry specific apps. They have just combined the sales organization. So a customer doesn't have to talk to this salesperson about ERP and this one HCM and this one CX and somebody else about everything from industry specific stuff. It's all one because they are finding that it's simpler for customers, and the Oracle portfolio is not like here's the horizontal ones over here and here's the industry specific, and they're not at all the same. They're really dovetailing these things, and they're building then special hooks into the database so that that's all optimized. The database is optimized to go with the infrastructure. So it's formidable. And Vinny, if there could be a transition there to number four on this AWS, right? I would give AWS, I think they're the winner of the Life is Not Fair award. You look at AWS's financial performance, right? Last quarter, they grew 20% to 31, $32 billion in revenue for the quarter. Uh, their RPO, what they call backlog, is somewhere in the range of almost $200 billion. And they're distant last relative to the other competitors they're facing. So it's not the financial side. You mentioned, with the great things Google Cloud's doing, Microsoft's, wide-ranging stuff, and how Azure's been a rocket ship. We talked about Oracle. What's the cool, thing that everybody has to have coming out of AWS right now? And I think they're riding a lot of historical momentum. They're still at the heart of a lot of big companies, but if we're looking at what's coming, I don't see the big thing that AWS is doing. It's like they've lost that magic of grabbing the attention and driving the agenda for not just customers, but the rest of the industry. I just don't see them anywhere near the front of that group.
I mean, as a company, not just AWS. And I don't know how they've isolated AWS going forward, but as a company, they have so many vertical strengths, so many global strengths. Maybe AWS should, it's kind of like when GE decided to have GE Digital. It's like, guys, you need to embed yourself in each one of your individual units, right? You have an aviation unit, you have a power unit, and so
Yeah.
on. Instead, they try to go to market on their own
Mhm.
and didn't have enough case studies for different industries. So maybe that is an AWS challenge also.
Yeah, and Vinny, again, in my comment about the life isn't fair. I'm glad it isn't fair for various reasons, and in this business, the competition is just astonishingly vicious and intense, and it's not slowing down. It's just going to get more intense as these companies get bigger. The cycles of change are shorter, the intensity of the change is higher. So when I think a company falls into, if my perception is at all accurate, that AWS is not innovating as fast as the others and it's not grabbing the attention and mind share as fast as the others, if you start to fall behind on that, how the heck do you try to catch up there? Um, I think it's interesting too that Andy Jassy uh, continues on all the earnings call. He's the guy who talks about AWS, not the CEO over there. Um, it's just it's a different picture. And they say, well, we got the Trainium and all the exclusive chips. That's great. It's good stuff, but they're not doing this stuff that has CEOs, not CIOs or CTOs, but CEOs of non-tech businesses saying, I got to get together with those people. We need to do more with
I
what
mean,
they're doing.
you're right, because you got to go into a CEO and talk about how do you become an AI first company? How do you become a labor light company? 4, 5, 6 years ago, we used to talk about asset light companies, right? Airbnb and Uber and so on. Now the interest is how do I make my organization, you know, revenue per headcount is a hugely important metric. Someone like Palantir with 4,000 employees is able to deliver that much market value. Every CEO around, in every industry says, I want to be that. And AWS should be selling them that message.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I'm sure at Las Vegas a couple weeks ago at their reInvent, uh, massive, convocation there, they had tons of people. And I imagine there's lots of people who are in the mid-level of the IT organization, developer organizations that said they came out of reInvent and says, this is the greatest thing ever. They were good last year. They're better this year. I love the direction they're headed in. That's all to the credit of AWS. But I think a lot of the others have flipped the conversation saying, I'm going to bring along all my traditional tech buyers and I'm in with the CEO and the board of directors and the
I get you.
CFO
I
because,
get your point. I get your point.
yeah.
That is huge. That is huge. Who's next?
Well, I want to ask you, Vinny, because it's SAPs. Now, you've written books about SAP, so I feel sort of like that name you've been calling me, an ignorant hut, uh, talking to you about SAP. You should be in the limelight here on that
Well,
one.
I was going to write. I've written several books on SAP. The next one was going to be SAP Nation 5.0, and I decided I'm going to wait a couple of years because to me, SAP, I've told them multiple times, you guys are a category unto yourself. However, you love to come down to compete against Oracle or compete against Workday or compete against Salesforce. You bring down to the level of your competition. You need to, you have more vertical coverage than anybody else. You have more global coverage than everybody else. Don't come down to that level. You define your own market. Unfortunately, I find SAP has become even more tactical in that sense. They become an S4 company. This is kind of like in the 2010s. What's your problem? HANA is the solution, right? Everything now in S4 is a solution. No, it's not. You know, I was part of the group at Gartner that coined ERP.
Mhm.
We had
Oh,
such an
you're the one we
ambitious,
have to blame.
it's such an ambitious definition we had. SAP comes down and goes, do the clean core, just put on accounting and materials management and a couple of other things. No, for freaking spending billions on ERP, you need to cover the whole enterprise. So I'm not as, clearly they're the strongest enterprise apps vendor, but I think they need to broaden their horizons a little bit. They become a little too tactically focused on migrating people to S4. And by the way, only 40% of the ECC customer base has done that. And it's
Uh,
been it's been a decade now, right? I
yeah.
wrote SAP Nation 2.0. I predicted that it would take them 12 to 15 years to migrate the customer base.
Wow.
Now, if you ask me, I'd say it'll take more like 20 years, or maybe
Okay.
many of those, you know, Rimini, the third-party maintenance vendor, is going to ECC customers and saying, stay on ECC, we'll bring in ServiceNow, we'll bring in a cloud infrastructure player and so on. We'll take you to the cloud and we'll also give you AI and you
Uh-huh.
can stay at your legacy. Don't spend billions upgrading to S4. So SAP is, to me, needs to, um, kind of like you say, AWS, strong from a qualifications perspective, messaging and so on probably needs to go through a similar reevaluation.
Yeah, yeah. Vinny, let me add on to, I think, excellent perspectives on that from a slightly different direction. That is from the CEO, Christian Klein, right? I know what is it, 5 years now? Yeah, that he came in as the 40-year-old CEO right in the middle of the pandemic. And remember that first earnings call he was on in April of 2020. They could not even offer any guidance about next quarter, next year. Their whole world had blown up, and he's in the middle of this. And then he had to say, oh, by the way, Wall Street, we are going to scrap the subscription model and we're going to switch over or scrap the license model and
Versus
flip it to subscription. Whoosh, made the stock tank. I think Hasso Plattner lost about $400 million overnight on that. And here's Christian, 40 years old as the CEO. It's been fascinating to watch him grow as a leader, customer advocate, you know, setting the company up for where it has to head in the future. But I also have been very impressed, Vinny, with how he's become something of a global statesman, trying to keep the European Union from the ridiculous path it was going down, saying, well, we'll create our own giant data centers so that, nobody will use Microsoft and Google and the other hyperscalers. It was just absolutely nuts. Now he's led the thing on data sovereignty for Germany, for Europe, and a lot of these things. So I think that global vision he has, he is positioning his company via his role in leadership as we are people that global companies, European companies can bank on to get a good deal, a fair deal, and harness the best of what, the traditional hyperscaler companies have. So I give him a lot of credit for that. For a young man to have that sort of vision and presence is powerful.
or the narrowing of the focus that they've brought to the enterprise, which is the cost of getting there. I think they're in a tough spot.
Yeah,
There's a
yeah,
lot of competition that can do it for much cheaper. May not have all the coverage, won't even have 30% of the coverage, but for many companies, that's good enough, right?
yeah,
And even SAP, they've localized for about 60 countries. Trump is showing us countries that we hadn't even heard about in
yeah,
20 years, right? I mean, the world is turned
yeah,
upside down. And we talked earlier about how the US has become a major force in the world. I don't see SAP going after US aggressively, because it's a whole different game here.
yeah,
At Sapphire, you were at Sapphire, right, this year.
yeah,
I was like, I kept reading. I said, these guys are going to talk about, hey, tariffs are crazy, but we have a solution that, protects our customers from that. No mention of tariffs. They had Mars on the stage, and I said, well, Mars can probably talk about, hey, look, Secretary Kennedy, we're ready for your changes in our recipes. SAP is going to help us do that. Nothing. They talked about S4. They had
yeah.
Mercedes on stage, and I talk about what this means. You're going to be investing more capex in the US. What does that mean? How is SAP going to help you? Nothing. S4, right? So I think they need to broaden their focus a little bit.
Yeah. Well, Vinny, the sixth company, number six on the Cloud Wars top 10, I think is indirectly, that's ServiceNow, applying a lot of pressure on SAP to improve and get better. I think in the 6 years that Bill McDermott has been the CEO of ServiceNow, I have not, I cannot recall him publicly mentioning SAP by name. He will say a big enterprise vendor or where I worked in the past. He doesn't refer to them by name. And I think his whole premise is somebody's going to get us out of this enterprise mess. And you alluded to, hey, we'll bring in ServiceNow to help fix some of what you'd like SAP to address more directly. And so I think ServiceNow has been, what's that thing, Vinny, in the middle of a washing machine that spins around? It's called an agitator, I think. Um, I think ServiceNow is a great agitator among the big tech companies because it does stuff that nobody else is doing. and it's finding these white spaces in between the traditional competitive lanes, and it is forcing others to think about it. And Bill's done a fantastic job with that. And the addition of Amit Zavery from Google Cloud and before that Oracle, he has done just a brilliant job. President, Chief Product Officer, Chief Operating Officer. They're more disciplined. Bill can go off and do the big dreaming and know that Amit is going to, operationalize all of that and kick it forward.
I'm a little more cautious about ServiceNow. They're a very good ITSM vendor, right? They're not as strong in the line of business. Okay. They're much more of a workflow vendor, which doesn't. I mean, Bill could sell anything to anybody, right? And to his credit, he's done amazing work in the 6 years he's been there. But from a analyst point of view, from a product point of view, they have a long way to go. I mean, putting them in the same class as SAP, I wouldn't, but God bless him for at least allowing people to talk, and even though he doesn't mention them, at least people to say, well, what about ServiceNow? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Vin, I didn't mean to make there's a direct comparison. ServiceNow can do what SAP can do. Certainly not. It's the going back to your point about what you feel the deficiencies of SAP right now, the things they need to do better to address these rapid changes that are coming. ServiceNow is coming in and saying, hey, I can take this SAP stuff you already have and connect that to where you need to be in the future. So, again, not getting in the direct path of anybody, direct competition, but that competition is coming for ServiceNow very rapidly. Palantir, with AI platform, Google Cloud, AI platform. I'm sure Oracle will be in that business. Microsoft, to some extent or another, will say, we're in that as well. But this is the great thing. We talked about this savage competition here. It makes everybody better. And, I like to say that the competition among the Cloud Wars top 10 ensures that the biggest winner in the Cloud Wars is always, always the customer. Um, and the stakes are so high. And again, the world's never seen something like this. So Bill has come up with new terms, new concepts, new ideas. Some of them caught on,
And did,
some
did, did,
not
did,
quite so
did,
much.
did he use the military industrial complex in one point?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The software industrial complex, and we're going to take that apart, step by step, piece by piece.
Having built the ecosystem at SAP, having built SAP Nation.
Yeah, so it's why, but I think these are great because customers look at various alternatives.
Yeah.
Traditional, we can go this way, we can pit them against each other, which is wonderful. And the ecosystem, or as Bill would say, the ecosystem that he's built is phenomenal. And now, Vinny, there's another company you followed closely at number 7 on the list is Workday. Um, Similar to like with SAP, how about you set the tone on this one?
Well, they've always been strong in the back office, finance, HR, procurement, and they continue to be. I'd like them, and God knows I've talked to Anil about this every year for the last God knows how long. And he
20
is,
years.
he's cautious. He honestly told me, he says, Vinny, one of the things we didn't do right at PeopleSoft was we verticalized in too many areas too fast, right? So he's gone the opposite here. Now he's being
Yeah,
a little too
yeah,
cautious, right? But in their core strengths, I think they continue to be very, very strong.
yeah, yeah. Um, Vinny, I think we might have been sitting together at the Workday Rising event when their relatively new head of product and technology, Garrett Kazmaier, came out and said, and now introducing the new Workday ERP. Um, I think they need to do a better job of saying why our Workday ERP is different, better, more adaptable, more easy to use, whatever terms you want to apply than the traditional stuff. Because um, I know in their minds, they're 100% convinced that it is better. I don't think they have done a good enough job of articulating that to the world where I think a lot of people say, oh my God, another ERP, I'd rather the one that I don't like so much, but at least I know it rather than,
I
jumping
you know,
into another one.
I I cautioned them. I said, ERP is a loaded gun. It you have 25 years, even though I take the blame for coining the term, right? It is associated with SAP's failures in the 2000 to 2000 phase. And I've had several CIOs say, I will never get another ERP on my resume.
Yeah.
You know, even if it means having to leave the industry, I will not implement another ERP.
No, no, no. Yeah.
So, it's one way to associate yourself with something bigger. I like the ambition, but coin your own freaking moniker.
Yeah. 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 And generationally, right, Vinny, the CIOs that, ERP was inextricably bound to their career, their persona, their outlook, their mindset. I don't think this new generation of business-oriented, revenue-oriented CIOs, I don't think they see it that way at all.
They don't. And, I had a great guest last week who said, if you go back, Bob, you probably remember this. If you go back to the dawn of IT, we had folks like Max Hopper at American Airlines, Rob Carter at FedEx. They defined organizations that were technology enabled. First generation of those, right? American Airlines with their Sabre system, FedEx with their tracking system, and so on. And this executive said, it looks like this is a time that we've got a generation of strategic CIOs. He said, we've had a decade, probably a little longer, of what he called vendor manager CIOs,
Uh-huh.
tactical,
Uh-huh.
tactical. The new strategic CIO won't give a darn about ERP or whatever. He's like, I'm going to custom build whatever possible, and
Yeah.
I'll implement packages wherever it makes sense. But I will drive my architecture and so on. So,
Yeah.
if he's correct, yeah, monikers won't matter.
Yeah. Vinny, and I I have a complaint here. You've hurt my feelings. Why in the world would you think that I would remember, stuff that happened 70 years ago when, you
70,
were a graduate student?
it wasn't 70. It wasn't 70. It was more like 40, 50 years ago.
Oh, well. No, it is getting older is not always fun in every way, but there's a lot of ways it is. And I think this sense of
You're
being able.
you are an ageless wonder. You still fly like Ray Wong does. I can't imagine you can keep up with him.
No, it's I think one of the great blessings of for me, of the many, many things I've been blessed with, is grandchildren. Because wow, you gotta rev up that engine, right, to keep up with those little rascals. So that's fun. But Vin, let me jump over to number 8 here on the list is Salesforce. I I don't mean this seriously, but if I'm going to overplay my sentiment here, I was heartbroken 2.5 years ago when Mark Benioff on earnings calls started to talk on and on and on again about profits and margins and never talked about growth, right? Because you had arguably the iconic growth company in US business or global business history. 20 straight years of quarter after quarter after quarter accelerating growth, all of a sudden say, no, 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 it's all about margins and profits and cash flow management. And I think profits are great. And I know public companies, you got to do that. But I think that took a little bit of the heart and soul out of the company. Right? You want to come here and be a top engineer, a top developer, a top salesperson. Your job is going to be to help us milk profits. And I think they went through some tough, tough quarters. But last earnings call several weeks ago, he was all about growth again. And I thought it was wonderful to hear. And it's such a force for good for customers to have him, driving that.
I was encouraged. I went to Dreamforce. I think you did too. And I was encouraged because they've always, Jujar, when Jujar was running verticals, they would always present to me on different things they were doing in 20 different industries.
Yeah.
Quietly, SAP always talks about its verticals. Salesforce has been growing it quite a bit. And then this year when I was there, they had robotics and physical AI starting to play. So from an agentic world perspective, I'm actually fairly optimistic about Salesforce.
Yeah, and they too are the AI platform company, right? Because they say Agentforce is primarily a platform. And yes, we'll have our own, and we'll have customers making them, and we'll have our ecosystem making them. So yeah, I think they've done a great job. And I just felt Mark was able to go back to being Mark, right? Because no matter how hard he tried to convince people over that 2.5 year span about profits and margins, to me, that was Mark following a script that somebody else wrote for him. Because,
One of the, I mean, not to get too political, but the fact that he had David Sachs, Mark has always been a wonderful interviewer. I've seen him interview Richard Branson,
yeah,
um, Jeff Immelt. I mean, and he's very polite. He's very warm when he interviews people. So here he is with David Sachs, and you go, Mr. San Francisco, very liberal, at least for a
yeah,
few years. It was such a flowing conversation. Of course, he got criticized. How could you be nice to somebody from the Trump administration? He's your guest. It's
yeah.
exactly how you're supposed to treat a guest. So,
There's
so
also, there's half the world that, you know, rotates that way. And everybody's free. You want to ignore half the world? Go ahead.
especially in the business in the executive suite. So,
Very, very true. So that was fun. Vinny, I want to talk about Palantir a little. They're number 10 on the list. Uh,
did you miss nine?
I
Did you?
did. I did. And that's IBM. I just want to, because something you said a minute ago tied into this. When you referred to Palantir and the relatively tiny number of people in that organization, in Q3, so right, July 1st to September 30th, their revenue went up 63%. Over $1 billion. This is not a tiny company. Their revenue went up over 63%, and the number of salespeople went down. So how do they do that? And one of the philosophies that they have there is, yes, we could make a very, very strong case to say that, holy crap, we see 63% growing for $1 billion plus company. We better add more salespeople. And he said that would feed into the longer term problem of if we add those salespeople, then we are covering up the deficiencies in our software. We should make the software better, so good, so easy to use, so intuitive, and so demonstrably better for customers that we don't need more salespeople. And it's a wild idea. And Vinny, I think a lot of people would say that is crazy. That is going to, there's a point that's not sustainable. 63% growth, fewer salespeople. So
Well,
it,
there's a
it's,
number of things that are attractive about the Palantir model. One is they're into outcome-based pricing,
yeah,
value-based pricing. That's how the
yeah,
top line is growing. It's not by just adding more seats or more subscriptions. This is very value-driven.
yeah,
Unlike their arrogance, Alex Karp he wrote a book where he goes, Silicon Valley is not patriotic anymore.
yeah,
Provocative, right? And arrogant. He'll tell customers, hey, look, if you don't like our value-based system, if you don't value-based pricing, if you don't like our ethics, um, who we work with, why we work with them, sorry, I'm not going to apologize to you. This is us, right?
yeah,
So it is a very different company, very, very different company.
yeah,
Um, to your point about differentiation, he is controversially differentiated, but hey, yeah, kind of like Larry has done over the years,
yeah.
you need some of them.
Yeah. And to the little things, Vinny, and I don't mean in any way to overplay this because it's not worth that, but it's a small thing. Their last earnings call, they had um, Alex, the CEO, they had their CRO, who was also, figure this one out, their chief legal officer, and they had their CTO and their chief financial officer. Alex Karp is on there in the earnings call in a white t-shirt. Um, and I don't think he was doing that to say, hey, look at me. It's just like if you're going to get caught up in the trappings of he's not wearing a shirt and tie, he didn't even have a jacket and a button-down shirt, I'm not going to do business. I'm like, all right, piss off. You're not the sort of person we're looking for anyway. If that's your priority, we're not the company for you. So the forward deployed engineer, every tech company in the world talks about that now. That was a Palantir discovery. Um, I think how they go about stuff. They defy these categories. And here again, Vinny, you're the villain. You coined the term ERP, which led to, all the boxes and categories that the tech industries use. They said, we don't think those boxes are going to be helpful for people trying to build next generation capabilities. So where
Absolutely.
they are, we'll use them, but they're defying that, and in turn, they're pushing their customers to think outside the tech industry boxes and into the thing of what's the business outcome. Let me start with what we want customers to be able to do, and then we build back from that. And whatever those pieces are, we'll get the right pieces, but it's not going to be conforming to a model of the past. So I admire their brashness and their ambition, and it's the right sort of arrogance, I think.
And they've gone after verticals that have traditionally not been easy to penetrate. Government, defense, right? And shockingly, you talk to private sector companies, and on the quiet, they'll tell you, "Oh yeah, you use Palantir for a couple of projects." So their reach is far greater than what their size should indicate. So
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then, Vinny, the last one on the list is IBM, and I have mixed, torn feelings about this because I'm not sure that IBM is going to make it on the Cloud Wars top 10 in 2026. Um, one of the basic things, and perhaps I'm being, too traditional or literal, something I've been criticizing some in our conversation here about IBM, they do not break out their cloud revenue. And you know, for some called cloud wars and with a huge component of being growth, how are you going to evaluate in the same context you do the other companies for one that doesn't play that? Yet they say hybrid cloud and AI, that's the core of the company. I love Arvind Krishna. I think he's done a spectacular job with IBM, and he's the mess he inherited from the previous CEO was I think 10 times worse than most people will ever know. And he's got them back in some very good capabilities. I just don't think where IBM is headed and where Cloud Wars is and is going are going to be a good match. So I'm not sure they're going to be on the radar in 2026.
well, I mean, if you look at it, they had a very strong data center business. It's mostly evaporating to the hyperscalers, right? They don't really have a SaaS practice, big SaaS practice on the services side, right? Many other firms have taken their place. So you're right. I mean, it's what I call spray painted cloud, um, um, messaging. All right. So if they're going to drop out, give us a clue. Who's looking promising?
All right, Vinny, I'll mention this to you, but please don't tell anybody that I said this. All right.
This
But
is
it's
gonna be. You want me to
oh,
edit this out?
no, no, no. Just don't tell anybody. OpenAI. If we whisper, nobody
Ooh,
else will hear it. Now,
ooh.
I've kept OpenAI off of the Cloud Wars top 10 because so much of their business was selling to other tech companies on the enterprise side. But, Altman has been quite bullish about talking about getting more directly into enterprise stuff and what they're doing, the impact they've had. Uh, and I think when they announced the $300 billion deal with Oracle, their revenue was they were on like a $12.5 billion, $13 billion revenue run rate. So if you admire audacity, then a $12.5 billion run rate company signing a couple years out in the future a $300 billion deal. I like that. So the guy, he's the ultimate debt propelled CEO. We better grow like hell and dazzle and delight our customers because we got some heavy bills to pay coming up in a couple years.
A lot of people, I mean, they start, they may go IPO next year, right? So a lot of people want them to succeed. Certainly Oracle wants them to succeed. Um, uh, I like ambition, even
Yeah,
if you look foolish, that I like ambition.
yeah,
So, I think they are, and maybe that's the stock, a little too focused on AGI and the enterprise is a different beast. Yeah.
yeah,
If he can build vertical agents, he'll get my attention.
yeah,
But
yeah. Hey, Vinny, about the AGI stuff, I don't know what this was, 6 months ago, but Sam Altman spoke at the Snowflake event, and he had a fireside chat with Sridhar Ramaswamy. And one of the things Sam Altman said was, the this stuff is advancing so rapidly. And, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, it's not just the speed with which it's changing, but the intensity of the change. He said, if you would show people, if you could stop time, and so say this was June of 2025, if you could take people from 3 years ago or go back 3 years, show them what we're able to do today, said those people 3 years ago, top AI people in the world, say that is AGI. You've got it. It's here. He said, now clearly it isn't, but relative to what was possible 2 or 3 years ago, and he said the next 2 or 3 years, what we're doing today versus what will be possible then, he said it'll make that previous 3 year change, he said, seem trivial. He said, so it is astonishing to think what's coming. And again, Vinny, if I just say this one other thing to your tremendous audience and the business leaders out there who watch you, the enterprise leaders, you can't, you cannot package and try to formulate your future strategy based on, past precedents, right? You've got to take where do I want to be? How do I create a future that's going to be great for my customers, great for my company, great for my employees, and be sustainable with this sort of magic. I don't mean magic in a bad way. I mean this incredible power of AI, but not to try to say to plot your future based on where you've been in the past. Inside the tech industry, outside the tech industry, I don't think that's a viable proposition.
that is a great way to, I mean, and when you look at someone like IBM, you wonder, have they done that same introspection, which is we're still selling DB2, we're still selling a bunch of stuff that was written in the 1970s, right? So you wonder if some companies publicly say one thing, but then internally they're like, how do I make my numbers, right? So
Yeah. Hey, Vinny, on that, just if I could, I think the one thing with IBM is what I said a couple minutes ago about the mess that Christian inherited. I think he would have loved to do that, exactly what you described, but he had to spend 2.5 or 3 years just mucking stuff, mucking out the stables. Who is it? Hercules who had to clean all that crap. I think Hercules would gladly have taken his job versus, what Arvind Krishna had to do. So we'll keep the Cloud Wars top 10 spots open. And if IBM at some point decides we're going to be more open about this, love to have them. We've had great new blood into the Cloud Wars top 10. Never seen anything like this. And Vinny, thank you so much for letting me be on your show. And you always
thank
elevate
you.
the people you speak to.
Thank you for basically leading us through the top 10. I didn't have much to do at all this time.
You sure didn't. My back's a little sore. I was carrying a heavy load here, Vin.
Well, Merry Christmas and have fun chasing after those little ones.
Merry Christmas, Vinny. And uh, you know, Anybody out there who is looking ahead at
He
grandparenthood,
meant to say, Jane, you ignorant.
Vinny, no, couldn't say it. Vinny, Merry Christmas to
It
you.
was all so nice and polite, and you had to ruin it.
I know I'm that way, Vinny. I'm sorry. You bring out the worst in me, and I apologize. But Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays to you and to all your wonderful audience. Thank you for having me.